It's 12:04 p.m. on April 1st, 2023. I'm continuing my reading of V.I. Lenin, The State and Revolution. Chapter 6. The Vulgarization of Marxism by the Opportunist. The question of the relation of the state to the social revolution and of the social revolution to the state, like the question of revolution generally, troubled the leading theoreticians and publicists of the Second International, 1889 to 1914, very little. But the most characteristic thing about the process of the gradual growth of opportunism, which led to the collapse of the Second International in 1914, is the fact that even when these people actually came right up against this question, they tried to evade it or else failed to notice it. In general, it may be said that evasiveness as regards the question of the relation of the proletarian revolution to the state, and evasiveness which was to the advantage of opportunism and fostered it, resulted in the distortion of Marxism and in its complete vulgarization. To characterize this lamentable process, if only briefly, we shall take the most prominent theoretician of Marxism, Plekhanov and Kautsky. Starting with section 1. Plekhanov's controversy with the anarchist. Plekhanov wrote a special pamphlet on the relation of anarchism to socialism, entitled Anarchism and Socialism, and published in German in 1894. In treating the subject, Plekhanov contrived completely to ignore the most urgent, burning, and politically most essential issue in the struggle against anarchism, viz., the relation of the revolution to the state and the question of the state in general. Two sections of his pamphlet stand out. One of them is historical and literary, and contains valuable material on the history of the ideas of Stirner, Proudhon, and others. The other is Philistine, and contains a clumsy dissertation on the theme that an anarchist cannot be distinguished from a bandit. A most amusing combination of subjects, and most characteristic of Plekhanov's whole activity on the eve of the revolution and during the revolutionary period in Russia. Indeed, in the years 1905 to 1917, Plekhanov revealed himself as a semi-doctrinaire and semi-Philistine who, in politics, trailed in the wake of the bourgeoisie. We have seen how, in their controversy with the anarchist, Marx and Engels, with the utmost thoroughness, explained their views on the relation of revolution to the state. In 1891, in his foreword to Marx's critique of the Gotha program, Engels wrote that we, that is Engels and Marx, were at that time hardly 2 years after the Hague Congress of the First International, engaged in the most violent struggle against Bakunin and his anarchists. End quote. The anarchists had tried to claim the Paris Commune as their own, so to say, as a corroboration of their doctrine, and they utterly failed to understand its lessons in Marxist analysis of these lessons. Anarchism has failed to give anything even approximating a true solution of the concrete political problems. Viz., must the old state machine be smashed, and what should be put in its place? But to speak of anarchism and socialism while completely evading the question of the state and failing to take note of the whole development of Marxism before and after the Commune meant inevitably slipping into opportunism. For what opportunism needs most of all is that the two questions just mentioned should not be raised at all. That in itself is a victory for opportunism. Section 2. Kautsky's controversy with the opportunist. Undoubtedly, an immeasurably larger number of Kautsky's works have been translated into Russian than into any other language. It is not without reason that some German social democrats say in jest that Kautsky is read more in Russian than in Germany. Let us say, parenthetically, that there is a far deeper historical significance in this jest than those who first made it suspect. The Russian workers, by advancing in 1905 an extraordinarily great and unprecedented demand for the best works of the best social democratic literature in the world, and by receiving translations and editions of these works in quantities unheard of in other countries, transplanted, so to speak, at an accelerated pace the enormous experience of a neighboring, more advanced country to the young soil of our proletarian movement. Besides his popularization of Marxism, Kautsky is particularly known in our country for his controversy with the opportunists and with Bernstein at their head. But one fact is almost unknown, one which cannot be overlooked if we set ourselves the task of investigating how Kautsky drifted into the morass of unbelievably disgraceful confusion and defense of social chauvinism during the supreme crisis of 1914 to 15. The fact is the following. Shortly before he came out against the most prominent representatives of opportunism in France, Mirand and Jerez, and in Germany, Bernstein, Kautsky betrayed their very considerable vacillation. The Marxist journal, Zarya, which was published in Stuttgart in 1901-02 and advocated revolutionary proletarian views, was forced to enter into controversy with Kautsky, to characterize as elastic the half-hearted, evasive resolution conciliatory towards the opportunist that he proposed at the International Socialist Congress in Paris in 1900. Kautsky's letters published in Germany reveal no less hesitancy on his part before he took the field against Bernstein. Of immeasurably greater significance, however, is the fact that in his very controversy with the opportunist, in his formulation of the question and his manner of treating it, we can now observe, as we investigate the history of Kautsky's latest betrayal of Marxism, his systematic gravitation towards opportunism precisely on the question of the state. Let us take Kautsky's first important work against opportunism, his Bernstein and the Social Democratic Program. Kautsky refutes Bernstein in detail, but here is a characteristic thing. Bernstein, and his premises on socialism, of heterostratian fame, accuses Marxism of Blanquism, an accusation since repeated thousands of times by the opportunist and liberal bourgeois in Russia against the representatives of revolutionary Marxism, the Bolsheviks. In this connection, Bernstein dwells particularly on Marx's The Civil War in France and tries, quite unsuccessfully as we have seen, to identify Marx's views on the lessons of the Commune with those of Proudhon. Bernstein pays a particular attention to the conclusion which Marx emphasized in his 1872 preface to the Communist Manifesto, viz., that the working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purposes. The utterance pleased Bernstein so much that he repeated it no less than 3 times in his book, interpreting it in the most distorted opportunist sense. As we have seen, Marx meant that the working class must smash, break, shatter, Sprengung, explosion, the expression used by Engels, the whole state machine. But according to Bernstein, it would appear as though Marx in these words warned the working class against excessive revolutionary zeal when seizing power. A cruder and more hideous distortion of Marx's ideas cannot be imagined. How then did Kautsky proceed in his most detailed refutation of Bernsteinism? He refrained from analyzing the utter distortion of Marxism by opportunism on this point. He cited the above-quoted passage from Engels' introduction to Marx's Civil War and said that according to Marx, the working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machine, but that, generally speaking, it can lay hold of it, and that was all. Not a word does Kautsky utter about the fact that Bernstein attributed to Marx the very opposite of Marx's real views, about the fact that since 1852, Marx had formulated the task of the proletarian revolution as being to smash the state machine. The result was that the most essential difference between Marxism and the opportunism on the subject of the task of the proletarian revolution was slurred over by Kautsky. Quote, "We can safely leave the solution of the problem of the proletarian dictatorship to the future," said Kautsky, writing against Bernstein. Page 172, German edition, end quote. This is not a polemic against Bernstein, but in essence a concession to him, a surrender to opportunism. For at present, the opportunists ask nothing better than to safely leave to the future all fundamental questions of the task of the proletarian revolution. From 1852 to 1891, for 40 years, Marx and Engels taught the proletariat that it must smash the state machine. Yet, in 1899, Kautsky, confronted with the complete betrayal of Marxism by the opportunists on this point, fraudulently substituted for the question of whether it is necessary to smash this machine the question of the concrete forms in which it is to be smashed, and then sought refuge behind the indisputable and barren Philistine truth: the concrete forms cannot be known in advance. As gulf separates Marx and Kautsky as regards their attitudes toward the proletarian's party task of preparing the working class for revolution. Let us take the next more mature work by Kautsky, which was also, to a considerable extent, devoted to a refutation of the opportunist errors. This is a pamphlet, The Social Revolution. In this pamphlet, the author chose as his special theme the question of the proletarian revolution and the proletarian regime. In dealing with it, he gave much that was exceedingly valuable, but as for the question of the state, he avoided it. Throughout the pamphlet, the author speaks of the winning of state power and no more. That is, he chooses a formula which makes a concession to the opportunist inasmuch as it admits the possibility of power being seized without destroying the state machine. The very thing which Marx in 1872 declared to be obsolete in the program of the Communist Manifesto is revived by Kautsky in 1902. A special paragraph in the pamphlets is devoted to the forms and the weapons of the social revolution. Here Kautsky speaks of the mass political strike, of civil war, and of the instruments of the might of the modern large state, such as the bureaucracy and the army. But not a word does he say about what the Commune had already taught the workers. Evidently, it was not without reason that Engels issued a warning, particularly to the German socialists, against superstitious reverence for the state. Kautsky treats the matter as follows. The victorious proletariat will carry out the democratic program, and he goes on to formulate its clauses. But not a word does he utter about the new material provided by the year 1871 on the subject of the supersession of bourgeois democracy by proletarian democracy. Kautsky disposes of the question by uttering such solid banalities as, quote, "Still, it goes without saying that we shall not achieve supremacy under the present conditions. Revolution itself presupposes a long and deep-going struggle, which, as it proceeds, will change our present political and social struggle." End quote. Undoubtedly, this goes without saying, just as does the truth that horses eat oats, or that Volga flows into the Caspian Sea. Only it is a pity that an empty and bombastic phrase about deep-going struggle is used as a means of avoiding a question of vital interest to the revolutionary proletariat, namely, wherein is expressed the deep-going nature of its revolution in relation to the state, in relation to democracy, as distinct from previous non-proletarian revolutions. By avoiding this question, Kautsky in practice makes a concession to opportunism on this most essential point, although in words he declares stern war against it and emphasizes the importance of the idea of revolution. How much of this idea worth when one is afraid to teach the workers the concrete lessons of revolution, or says revolutionary idealism before everything else, or announces that English workers are now hardly more than petty bourgeois. Quote, "The most varied forms of enterprises, bureaucratic, trade unionist, cooperative, private, can exist side by side in socialist society," Kautsky writes. There are enterprises which cannot do without a bureaucratic organization, for example, the railways. Here the democratic organization may take the following shape. The workers elect delegates who form a sort of parliament which draws up the working regulations and supervises the management of the bureaucratic apparatus. The management of other enterprises may be transferred to the trade unions, and still others may become cooperative enterprises. Pages 148 and 115, Russian translation, published in Geneva, 1903. End quote. This reasoning is erroneous. It is a step backward compared with the explanations Marx and Engels gave in the 70s, using the lessons of the Commune as an example. As far as the supposedly necessary bureaucratic organization is concerned, there is no difference whatever between railways and any other enterprise in large-scale machine industry, any factory, large store, or large-scale capitalist agricultural enterprise. The technique of all such enterprises makes absolutely imperative the strictest discipline, the utmost precision on the part of everyone in carrying out his allotted task, for otherwise the whole enterprise may come to a stop, or machinery or the finished product may be damaged. In all such enterprises, the workers will, of course, elect delegates who will form a sort of parliament. But the whole point is that this sort of parliament will not be a parliament in the sense in which we understand bourgeois parliamentary institutions. The whole point is that this sort of parliament will not merely draw up the working regulations and supervise the management of the bureaucratic apparatus, as Kautsky, whose ideas do not go beyond the bounds of bourgeois parliamentarism, imagines. In socialist society, the sort of parliament consisting of workers' deputies will, of course, draw up the working regulations and supervise the management of the apparatus, but this apparatus will not be bureaucratic. The workers, having conquered political power, will smash the old bureaucratic apparatus. They will shatter it into its very foundation. They will destroy it to the very roots, and they will replace it by a new one. consisting of the very same workers and office employees against whose transformation into bureaucrats the measures will at once be taken, which were specified in detail by Marx and Engels. 1. Not only election, but also recall at any time. 2. Pay not exceeding that of a workman. 3. Immediate introduction of control and supervision by all, so that all shall become bureaucrats for a time, and that, therefore, nobody may be able to become a bureaucrat. Kautsky has not reflected at all on Marx's words. Quote, the commune was a working, not a parliamentary body, legislative and executive at the same time, end quote. Kautsky has not understood at all the difference between bourgeois parliamentarism, which combines democracy not for the people with bureaucracy against the people, and proletarian democracy, which will take immediate steps to cut bureaucracy down to the roots, and which will be able to carry out measures to the end, to the complete abolition of bureaucracy, to the introduction of complete democracy for the people. Kautsky here displays the same old superstitious reverence for the state and superstitious belief in bureaucracy. Let us now pass on to the last and best of Kautsky's works against the opportunists, his pamphlet, The Road to Power, which I believe has not been translated into Russian, for it was published at the time when the reaction was at its height here in 1909. This pamphlet marks a considerable step forward inasmuch as it does not deal with the revolutionary program in general, as in the pamphlet of 1899 against Bernstein, or with the task of the social revolution irrespective of the time of its occurrence, as in the 1902 pamphlet, The Social Revolution. It deals with the concrete conditions which compel us to recognize that the era of revolutions is approaching. The author definitely points to the intensification of class antagonism in general and to imperialism, which plays a particularly important part in this connection. After the revolutionary period of 1789 to 1871 in Western Europe, he says a similar period began in the East in 1905. The world war is approaching with menacing rapidity. Quote, the proletarian can no longer talk of premature revolution. We have entered a revolutionary period. The revolutionary era is beginning. End quote. These declarations are perfectly clear. The pamphlet of Kautsky should serve as a measure of comparison between what German social democracy promised to be before the imperialist war and the depth of degradation to which it, Kautsky himself included, sank when the war broke out. Quote, the present situation, Kautsky wrote in the pamphlet we are examining, is fraught with the danger that we, i.e. German social democracy, may easily appear to be more moderate than we really are, end quote. It turned out that in reality, the German Social Democratic Party was much more moderate and opportunist than it appeared to be. The more characteristic it is it, therefore, that although Kautsky so definitely declared that the era of revolutions had already begun, in the pamphlet which he himself said was devoted precisely to an analysis of the political revolution, he again completely avoided the question of the state. These evasions of the question, these omissions and equivocations, inevitably led in their sum total to that complete swing over to opportunism which we shall now have to deal. German social democracy in the person of Kautsky seems to have declared, I adhere to revolutionary views, 1899. I recognize, in particular, the inevitability of the social revolution of the proletariat, 1902. I recognize the advent of a new era of revolutions, 1909. Still, I'm going back on what Marx said as early as 1852 now, that the question of the task of the proletarian revolution is in relation to the state is being raised, 1912. It was precisely in this direct form that the question was put in Kautsky's controversy with Panikkuk. Into the sections, bottom of page 133.